Okay, so I'm back, and the whole afternoon, my afternoon is reserved for discussion. So we can have discussion as long as you want. So please go ahead.
Yeah. So we have the first question from Abu Talha Faruqi. So I think he's on.
Thank you so much for this enlightening talk and orienting us towards non-Orientalists' understanding of Shaheen Bagh. I just wanted to sort of ask some questions and maybe share my comments upon the things that you talked about. So I agree with the points that you made, especially the conundrum of one kind of nationalism fighting against another kind of nationalism, and CAA actually being a product of the nationalism. But I would say that another way, and I would like your opinion on this, that another way of seeing the presence of flag and constitution and that book and Ambedkar and stuff like that would be to see it as a as a way of theocentric thinking, right? So believing in the text, believing in the book, and sort of having a belief in it, considering as a religion, it as a religion, and religion not in a very in the classical modernist way of being anti-secular, right? And being against its anthropocentric implementations, applications, appropriatizations. I think that also can be understood. That also can be one of the rationalizations. So that is one thing. The other thing also, very interesting, the way you make Shaheen Bagh an event of the future and you use Derrida. So I think the other thing which we can also draw from Derrida is, when Derrida talks about the concept of democracy as a promise. So he says that, democracy is always a promise. So it is always deferred, it is always in the future. And then he uses this, he also uses the term called aporia, where he says that, democracy, there is always an undemocratic essence in democracy. So he says that it is to come in the future because it has to become more democratic. So which means that it is always going through an improvement exercise. So so I think that also can be used to explain, understand, interpret Shaheen Bagh. But I think one of the things which we should be wary of is that we should not become too, in a way, Hegelian, or we should not become too much Platonian in trying to find an absolute truth in the future, in the in some abstraction being the real thing, being the beautiful thing against the against the materiality of the present, right? So too much emphasis on that aspect of future, which is in a way imaginary, is something that I would, I would be wary of. But again, I would like to hear your, your understanding of these predicaments.
Yeah, so I think much of what you said, I take more as comment rather than question. The 2 points which I want to stress here is, yes, the democracy to come, and I already wrote about this in 2011 in a piece engaging with Derrida's idea of what it means when he says democracy to come. And I think without being diplomatic, I would say that your reading of Derrida is, in my view, wrong. He is not talking about improvement, So improvement assumes already a fixed thing, with all its constituents and determinants. And improvement also assumes a thing which needs to be improved. Another reading of Derrida is that actually he is in so doing, democracy to come, to gesture towards the potential towards the emergent, he's also, in his own way, implicitly canceling democracy and asking us humans to think beyond democracy, which is not as if to discard democracy itself, but to use its resources in order to create something entirely new, you know?
Yeah. Maybe actually it came out wrong, but I sort of know this concept where he talks about mourning. So I mean, I just want to clarify that I was actually
but the way you formulated it
yeah.
previously, I'm saying that in my reading it is wrong.
Yeah. No, you're right. So he basically talks
Now
about
the second point about constitution and so on, I think we have to be very emphatic about this. Like, you see, if you read Sartre's What is Literature, where he says that words are like loaded pistol. Okay, so that is one way of looking at words. In Plato, it is that words are basically orphan in themselves, unless it is mobilized or how it is used. Now, of course, when you say constitution, you know, constitution has set of words and so on and so forth. But the key point here is, and we have to pay much attention to this, that there is a word called socialist in the constitution. Now, what is happening to that word? Nobody is talking about this. Ruthless capitalization is happening despite socialist word being inserted in the constitution. And to make it clearer, neither socialist nor secular appeared in the constitution until mid-70s. Now, if you read, there is this famous thing called the Avadi Congress, which this is a session of Indian National Congress where this phrase socialistic pattern of the society, and this is attributed to Nehru and so on and so forth. But as you know, Nehru's commitment to not socialistic pattern of society was bogus from the start. What I'm trying to say here is that whatever is in the constitution, those words, those phrases, those values in themselves are not sufficient. How it is used, you know, and for what it is used, and that is predicated upon the capacity, or rather the incapacity of different sectors, individuals, and groups of the social formation. Now, remember, when Amit Shah said in Parliament that nobody who is involved, in his words, in the riot would be spared. Now, if you take it on the face value, there is nothing wrong with it, you know, that every person responsible for the riot would be punished. This is quite a universal and nice statement. But what he meant by it, and what is the way in which this punishing of the criminal unfolded? It unfolded in the way that those who were not responsible, they were made responsible, and those who were responsible, they were set free, right? So it is, and that is where I want to say, if you recall, and that I think is a crucial element in Deluge, that interaction between language, body, things, and the world, you know, it is that entire tapestry that gives power or its lack to the words. So words in themselves are not enough in this particular context, you know. So that is all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you, Irfan. Now we have Umair. Umair, you can go.
Thank you, Professor Irfan, for such an informative and inspiring lecture. We hardly get these lectures in India these days. So you talked about hello.
Yeah, you are audible. Go on.
So you talked about the Shaheen Bagh being an event of future, and you also said that there's a buzz about it. So where do you see this buzz, and how do you recognize it? Like, is it the energy or the conversation? Like, what specifics are you talking about, sir?
So one would be clearly, if you take, and what I mean is that there are not simply two sides, there are always more than two sides. But if you take the perspective of the activist and the perspective of the regime, so the anxiety in the regime shows that sign. And this has come in various ways, for us. And here I want to say that we should not be seduced by the present, which is not to say that we should dismiss it, 20 years later or 30 years later, when we read this event, we will look at it differently. But to get back to your specific point, I think what is crucial here is the sign of anxiety, and relate that sign of anxiety with the anger or sense of dissatisfaction among the people, now the anxiety and the sense of anger and dissatisfaction, there is some sense of lack of correspondence between them, and that is precisely because you have institutionalized mass bullshitter who run this society. And what I mean by this is the media. If the media had played a constructive, ethical role, things probably would have been very different. There are very few places which basically work on the principles of democracy. So this is one way to read it, but I'm sure you may have other thoughts, or different people might read it differently.
Okay. So third one on the queue is Adil Wani. Are you here?
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So my question is that is Shaheen Bagh, as an event, as you described it as an event, really a process in the Brodelian sense and not a protest? And if it is a process, how do you see its outcome in terms of assertion of Muslim identity within a Hindu majoritarian state?
No, so the second question, this is like, the second question is actually not a question. This is a question which you can ask anybody. If you are a social scientist and you listen to a lecture on nuclear physics, and without knowing anything about nuclear physics, you could say that, but sir, can you tell us what this nuclear physics is going to look like in the future? That is not a question. So anyway, your first question, because it is like in the realm of prediction, and which I think I have already said enough in the talk. Now about your first question, I think we should not take event and process as antagonistic to each other. So Brothers was more sort of a reaction to that positivist kind of historiography, right? and he stressed the process rather than event, but there is a way in which you can synthesize it. So if Brothels or Annals School in general was an eventless historiography, there is a possibility of doing something which is eventful historiography. That is to say that it is not a question of either we take event seriously or process, but we are attentive to both in a manner that it doesn't do disservice to either of them. Having said that, probably some of you might know that Brodel, who kept on stressing the process, and as I described it to you, for him the moment of significant changes was not evident even in an event like French Revolution. Although he did all these things, but in one place, he did say that and of course he was an author who wrote book, and he said that, well, to the author of a book, every book is a moment of rupture. So if you apply that Brodelian method of process, then it would be like, in his scheme, there would be only few books, probably in a millennium that would deserve attention. But to its author, every book is momentous in terms of inaugurating something new. So my latter response is more to point out that, well, there is some element of ambiguity in Brodel himself when he looked at his own work or individual authors. But to your more substantive question about whether to pay attention to just event or process, I think there is a way to synthesize. But the manner in which one does, that of course will depend upon the individuals who do it, but also on the nature of the problem that is at stake. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think we have much more questions. So we can take the second round if the time permits. Otherwise, now we'll go to Umar Farooq.
Tahir, just a second. If you want to follow it up, what was the name of the previous gentleman?
Adil Wani.
So Adil, if you think that you need to come back, please feel free. If you think that you're not clear or there was misunderstanding, and this is applicable to all the subsequent interlocutors as well.
Hello,
Yes.
am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum all. Professor, I want you to share your views on like international support, like when UN Human Rights Commission and we have seen like progressive like people who are concerned about human rights, when they raised concern about anti-CAA fallout, like there were option for Shaheen Bagh to accept international support, and do you agree whether do you agree that they're reluctant to take support in fear of more persecution, but eventually they're persecuted anyway? I mean, if they would have taken international support, and if it is should they take the international support? Like, that's question. Two things, mainly on whether Shaheen Bagh should have taken more international support, and secondly, whether Shaheen Bagh has its limitation in accepting the international support. So this is my question, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think it is not that the international support was entirely missing. International support did come, you know. Now, the extent to which those who were participant of the movement, to what were the resources available to them to reach out to the potential supporters across the world. Much also depends upon the networks and resources and so forth. So my point would be that it was not that it was entirely absent. And the second is about the availability, connectivity, and the network. But if you hinted at the point, and this we can say by way of conjecture, you know, which is to say that the number of people that the Buddhist nationalist or Burmese army have killed in Burma, you know, or the genocidal violence against Rohingyas. We could ask this question that if these Rohingyas were not Muslims, but people of other faith, would the international community have maintained the same reaction as they did? And that is anybody's guess. So if you're hinting that, then there is a point that, you know, if the actors were different, probably then the response would have been different. But at the same time, you should not dismiss whatever support came. And I think it did show to a lot of international observers at the same time the visibility of this vital section of the Indian society to the international audience, articulating as they did a different kind of language of politics.
Okay. Now we have a question from Arisha. Instead of asking directly, she has texted it. So I will read it out. Thank you, sir. You have given us a lot of questions and thoughts, and also answers to a lot of our questions, I feel. Could you please also throw some light on the way you interpret unity of the oppressed in the context of the anti-CAA protest? I look at the image of Ambedkar, which you referred to in your lecture, and the participation of Chandrasekhar Azad in the protest, and many other such instances. Is that clear?
Yeah, but this is a question, again, you could ask, it is not entirely connected to the subject of the talk. So this is a more general kind of question which I could ask you, like, you know, what do you think is the future of humanity, you know? But let me use this occasion to say something about solidarity. And this is something which one must take into account. Now, solidarity among different, so let me first make my hypothesis or the assumption clear, that any social formation is not monolithic. There are issues of differences, there are questions of inequality along economic, language, cultural, gender lines, you know? So accepting that diversity when it comes to issues of coalition building or expressing solidarity, you know, we must resist any attempt whereby certain section of certain section of the society or certain class of political activists, they lay down the condition of solidarity, and those conditions are not actually taking you as the subject as you are, but those conditions amount to converting you, you know? So, which is to say, rather than accepting the the difference of the subject position, you want to convert it. And by conversion, of course, I don't mean simply religious conversion, you know? There are ideological conversion, there are cultural conversion, there is linguistic conversion, and so on and so forth. So any solidarity or the unity of the oppressed, you know, whether along the lines of gender, caste, and of course, you know, in the case of India, the question of Adivasi is no less significant. They have to give due recognition to the difference and then engage in the groundwork of building a solidarity or unity rather than trying to convert, you know, and bring the other, which is people of different backgrounds, to your own position. So in other words, solidarity, coalition building, or unity should not be an act of conversion.
Okay.
And I'm using conversion in a more broad sense.
Okay. Next on the queue, we have Khwaja Ziauddin. Please go on.
Yeah, thank you for such a wonderful talk and, in fact, elaboration of various aspects. I have a small and quick, whether it is a question, but the entire idea of becoming in the form of Shadab one mentions about. Do you find that such type of becoming is perceived as, you know, a great or serious threat by even in a democratic state like India? Or in other words, is it the state in itself is going through a transitions, you know, from democratic state in principles to something else? And that is making this regime to feel threatened by someone like, you know, becoming. And second connecting question is that why is it considered so harsh, you know, if an individual assert his or her identity based on a faith somebody belongs to, despite of or apart from the identity as a citizen, you know, because what somebody is more, or the entire debates inside India is focusing that the identity based on citizenship is the only identity that can bring or create some space which Shaheen Bagh wanted to or has already created. So why it is so troubling for Muslims when an individual or an entire community assert their identity in India, or it goes across the territory? Is it something that there is an inherent threat perceived again by a group of people here, or it's just merely a threat which is perceived wrongly? Yeah, that's like 2 points I wanted to raise.
So the first point, what was the first point?
Yeah, the idea of becoming, you know, when you talk
okay.
about...
Yeah, I mean, that is so obvious. And as I already made this point that if all the leading activists have been put in prison, you know, and it is the poetry which is incarcerated, not simply individuals, because these individuals embody the poetry, the becoming, right? And clearly, that is not something which is acceptable to the power that be, you know. Now, the question that, and it is not very clear to me when you say that whether perceived. Now, in certain cases, when people use that phrase, they might mean that, you know, perceived as opposed to real, you know, or a co-conjunctional. So in other words, in some cases, the threat can be real. In other cases, the threat can be perceived, but which is to say that actually it is not there, you know. But let's keep that aside. Now, this discourse of citizenship, okay, which is presented as some kind of panacea, one has to recognize its limit on two grounds. So you have people like Salah bin Habib who talks about cosmopolitanism and the citizenship as the mechanism of the future and so on and so forth. There is something called, and this relates to the point that I made about the words in the Constitution, or when somebody said that, you know, all the guilty person will be punished, which is a nice statement, but of course, the very meaning of guilty is turned upside down, you know? So likewise, there is the legal citizenship, right? But how that legality is used, by whom and for what purposes, that in itself cannot be resolved through the question of technical citizenship. So there are scholars who talk about cultural citizenship. So of course you have been born or whatever, your forefathers have been there for centuries and whatnot. But it is not simply the legal citizenship, but the cultural citizenship. And of course that relates to the idea that, you know, what is the national culture. You know that those of you who might be from Jamia, it was Abid Hussain who wrote this book called The National Culture of India. So in the process of nation-state making, which is simultaneously an act of unmaking at the same time, you know, so this idea of national culture emerges. So the concept of cultural citizenship precisely is brought to mark the limit of the legal citizenship. Now with this, of course, we should not lose sight of the fact that the cultural citizenship, in the case of India, which is the topic of the discussion this afternoon, culture is, especially by the regime, they mean culture in a very exclusive sense, you know. So it is our culture, which itself is a Brahmanical notion of culture, and then arranging it hierarchically or placing other cultures hierarchically, you know. So even this idea of cultural citizenship is problematic from that perspective, you know. So which is to say that I think citizenship discourse is important. By the way, I think in 60s and 70s, people like T.H. Marshall, and he's one of the key people to write about citizenship in the British context. But he was also stressing the idea of the social in the category of citizenship, you know. So one can definitely be attentive to the discourse of citizenship, but also mark the exclusionary nature of citizenship is, you know, I've written about it. One guy in India, he was put in Tihar jail for 27 months, even though he's a citizen of America. And to my knowledge, America never made a claim that this guy is citizen and you cannot put in jail. You know, but what if that guy was white? You know, of course, it is possible that America might have made something different. Now here, those who talk about in terms of citizenship and all that. Now, Gorkha regiment, or so there are people who are technically citizen of Nepal, but they work in the Indian Army. Now, from a nation state perspective, those who work in your army could only be Indian citizen, but you have people in Indian Army who are not citizens of India. This has been a long colonial practice, you know, under the British, they were recruited. So what I'm saying is that when this discourse of citizenship and all that it is being brought, you also see how the non-citizens are also already part of the nation. And of course, these people from, if you work in the army, your job is either to kill others or get killed, you know, in the ultimate analysis, you know, but they're not technically citizen in terms of holding passport or does that make sense?
Yeah. And I forgot to introduce Khoja Ziauddin. He is faculty at Maulana Azad National Urdu University, and he was one of our guests in this series. And Irfan Ahmad, you might know him personally as well. I think we had a trip to Charminar while you were in Hyderabad. Anyway, we'll move on.
Sure, I remember having tea.
Yeah. We'll move on to next question. It's from Sobia, and I was asked to read it out. So here it goes. I was wondering if the exhibitionary display of Indian flags could be more usefully understood as a necessary symbol to validate and confirm to the Hindu nation the otherwise questionable and vulnerable. The otherwise questionable and vulnerable secular and national identity of the protesting Muslims who are by default considered problematic anti-national, who do not believe in the constitution. It's a bit long sentence. Raising the flag was an indicative of a subjectivity that needed to prove itself as an otherwise anti-national Pakistani sympathizer. So I believe it raked only if inferior colonial mindset. So it was a question on raising the Indian flags, and she thinks that it rakes inferior colonial mindset. Yeah.
I have to say I didn't get the question in the first place.
I will read it out once again. Sorry.
Why don't you ask him or her to ask it?
Sobia, you want to ask it yourself? Otherwise, I'm putting that question in the chat box as well.
And is this chat box also on my screen or?
Yes, it is the.
I think I clicked it, but it looked like there were so many things.
The last one you can just check. The last one. That's it.
The last one.
Yeah.
The last one on my screen is from Thai to everyone. It was.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, I was wondering if the exhibitionary display of Indian flags could be more usefully understood as a necessary symbol to validate and conform to the Hindu nation the the otherwise questionable and vulnerable secular national identity of the protesting Muslims who are by default considered problematic anti-national, who do not believe in the constitution. Raising the flag was an indicative of a subjectivity that needs to prove itself as an otherwise anti-national Pakistani sympathizer. So I believe it reeked only of inferior colonial mindset. Yeah, I think the way it is formulated, it lacks clarity, because in the very first sentence there are conceptual tension, okay? But if he or she doesn't want to come, because if you have the direct interaction, we can also ask, and so that there is not a possibility of confusion or misunderstanding. So I think I will probably escape this one, because rather than giving a wrong answer to a less than clear question, it is better to shift to another question.
Okay, then we have Praveen Tulasi. He is here. Maybe he can ask the question.
Professor Irfan, thank you for the lecture. You have given a very elaborate analysis of how events have been studied and how we should see Shaheen Bagh as an event. Professor, I was wondering, isn't this, rather than calling it Shaheen Bagh as an event, because Shaheen Bagh did not necessarily invite a rupture. It didn't actually give us a complete rupture in terms of Indian political thinking, but rather it was making the Muslim women and also the Muslims participate directly in the Indian socio-political process, and also the very direct claim to citizenship from all the working class to the affluent Muslims. Going with what is actually an event, considering the rule that existed in India, when does this documentation process actually start in India? Who actually owns this thing called document, or especially in the CAA, it was very clearly mentioned by the current Home Minister that one should have this document. So, since you are an anthropologist, how do we see this process of having document? Many from BC to the current times, the process of owning a document is not essential, or it is not relevant in many communities and societies within India. So by calling Shaheen Bagh as an event, are we not trying to call it, are we not trying to document or monumentalize it? Because what Baduyans in India are also doing is to make everything an event, and also give it a holier than thou status. For example, there was House Rani, in House Rani there was similar kind of sitting by the Muslim women and men. So here the difference between Shaheen Bagh and the other inspiration from Shaheen Bagh is that in Shaheen Bagh you had everyone who was going to Shaheen Bagh and speaking, but nobody was willing to go and participate in the other gatherings. So why to essentialize, or why to make Shaheen Bagh a sacred entity rather than call it as a democratic means? So I'm really not convinced how we should consider Shaheen Bagh as an event, because I'm sure if not for Corona, then if not for COVID in March, I'm sure it would have had the absolute ability to make itself as a major event in Indian political history. But the very let's say threat that people felt because of Corona ensured that Shaheen Bagh did not become an event? So how do you see? Thank you.
Yeah, I think your thoughts are not organized. You said so many things, and they didn't seem to me to be logically, all of them connected. If you don't think it is an event, this was my way of describing it, why it is an event, and I think I gave enough evidence, analytical as well as empirical. If you're not convinced, then of course you are free, and that would also mean that I didn't do a good job. So that is my response to some of the things that you have said. The other things, I mean, you had questions, you have your own judgment, and it lacked clarity in my view. You were saying so many things. So can you formulate in like 2 short sentences in terms of question, and then I will try to respond.
Sir, your last work was Religion as Critique. This is one of the major work that you produced, and as a student of political science and philosophy, I had the opportunity to read it. Do you see that the current day Hindutva regime is threatened with the very philosophical notions that Islam had propounded? Is that one of the reasons why CAA and RC is enforced in this country, that can actually remove that is actually trying to destabilize the citizenship of Muslims? This is the question that I wanted to ask, but I wanted to write an email to you on this.
Well, what you said now, that is something entirely different from what you had said before. I think, and I'm not sure if I understood you still, but let me say, assuming that I understood you correctly, So I think the larger debate on citizenship is broadly defined under 2 categories. And this is a non-English word which I'm forgetting. It has something like something which is based on the soil, which is like, birthplace. And then there is an idea of ethnic notion of citizenship. Germany, for example, has an ethnic notion of citizenship. So if you prove that your forefathers have been of German blood, then even today you can get the citizenship. Now, in those terms, so the so-called broader notion of citizenship, and one, or you could might frame it in terms of being inclusive, territory-based notion of citizenship, and then the ethnic one. Now, that clearly is the case that this idea of ethnic notion of citizenship is what is operative in India at the moment, And if we look at the works of the architect of the RSS and BJP, they clearly are guided by that idea of ethnic citizenship, in which, of course, there are people of other faiths who appear as disruptive or as corrupting influence. So Christians are also presented as outsider to that, but I think Islam and Muslims, they occupy more space in that kind of discourse, So if you mean that that is clearly the case, and I would add that this is not simply the exclusive property of RSS, Jan Sangh or BJP. You will find similar ideas within the Congress, at least in practice.
Thank you, Irfan. I could see at least two more hands are already up, Ravinder Ansari and Hadia. At the same time, I have some other questions which is already received prior to this. So I will just read it out. This is from Zahra Sharwani. She asked, "Thank you, Professor, for this very enlightening talk. There was a woman from Kashmir who was prevented from speaking at Shaheen Bagh while chants of Azadi that originate from Kashmir were widely recited. How do you see this prevention at Shaheen Bagh, especially in relation to your comment on being wary of a form of solidarity that seeks conversion?"
Well, I don't know this particular case that that the questioner is referring to. So it would be improper for me to address it. The key question here would be to also know what was the ground of prevention. Since I don't know, I cannot say.
Okay. Then we'll move on to Arvinder Ansari. Arvinder Ansari, you can unmute and ask your query. Arvinder Ansari, are you here? You have to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm there. Just give me a second to, yes. Thank you, Irfan, for such a wonderful presentation. And, you know, there were so many things in my mind. As I always used to think about Shaheen Bagh, which is also considered as unfinished agenda.
So
now,
it is considered as?
Unfinished. It's unfinished, you know, because it was abandoned because of COVID. So, you know, we were trying. In fact, we tried our level best that, you know, on 8th March that we could give it a different shape. That was our concern, and we were talking to the women that if we could. But my concern and my query here is that, you know, the way this Shaheen Bagh movement has changed it was a turning point in Muslim women's movement in India. The image of Muslim women, which was painted as subjugated women, had completely changed. And these were women, you know, who were out right from 80 years to 8 years. You could see in Shaheen Bagh, these women were there. But post Shaheen Bagh, what happened to the students and the women students of Jamia has also, you know, kind of have you know, discouraged them a lot. You know, so do you see any hope? Though, you know, like farmers protest, people say that Shaheen Bagh is the mother of now all new resistance movements which are taking place, the way the movements have come up. But do you see that there is any scope that this movement can be revived and again Muslim women would come out and would be so active? How do you look at the future of Shaheen Bagh movement, if I put it in a very crisp manner?
So let me think about it. Yeah, I mean, it was a singular movement, which I think you agree with. I just wanted to add a bit on that point, that while unprecedented and so on, it has to be also seen if you take not the centuries span of brothel, but let's say 150 years span, you know, people do not know, like, you know, and this was even most surprising given the context of Jamia, that, you know, the figure of Bi Amma, you know, which is an iconic face in the Khilafat movement.
Yes,
Mother
yes.
of Ali brothers, you
Ali
know.
brothers, yes. They were
So in some ways, definitely it was there that, you know, the women had become more prominent and they have taken charge of this. But it is also, and I think, a culture, culture is like not simply a question of, you know, 20 or 30 years or 10 years, you know. It has sedimented and layers of ideas and practices, you know. So it is not simply Biyama. I mean, if you remember when Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan sent his daughter to study at what is called as the Oxford of the East, which is Allahabad. Of course, I think, you know, for some time, Aligarh is also considered as something like that in terms of Oxford. So in that frontier society, it was something unheard of for a woman to go and study at Allahabad, and that too, you know, whatever, that Qabaili culture and so on and so forth. So all these moments were revolutionary for their own time. So I'm not saying that what you are saying is invalid, but to say that this moment is remarkable, but there were also previous moments which were remarkable in their own context. If you read, I had the chance to read the autobiography of the first woman from Patna University. So she was the first woman in Bihar who went to Patna University after doing matriculation, you know, first Muslim woman, you know. So in that context, that itself is a revolutionary thing, you know. So anyway, that is one point. The second point, when it comes to the future, I think the talk was already about the future. But if by future you mean, so future is also different kinds. If you mean a pointed future in terms of temporal specificity, that I cannot say, because from the framework of event itself, it is not simply possible, because once you plan and announce it, you know, the whole idea of the eventness is gone. So if you had asked people in August 2019, right in Abul Fazal Enclave, nobody would have told you that, you know.
Yeah, if 15th December would have not happened, Shaheen Bagh would not have happened. 15th December was a catalyst point for the Shaheen Bagh movement, because, yeah, so you know,
that is right. So my point is, the eventness of an event will go away, or I'm not a fortune teller. Although
yes. My worry, Irfan, is that how do we keep, you know, the agency of women, Muslim women was very important, the kind of role it played. You know, yes, you gave us significant examples from history, but that was maybe, you know, a woman who has never been to school, college, and, you know, this was a kind of movement which was also, you know, which also challenged the dichotomy of private and public. Was a very, very significant movement. And how do, as an academicians, we document and keep alive, at least in academia, is also very important.
Irfan, there is a related question from Asma. I will read out the question. When you read the clutching of the flag and constitution as a move to reveal the hollowness of these icons, we could be missing out on the invocation or claims that the women on the street was also making, as against the mainstream, I mean M-A-L-E, mainstream political vocabulary and speech, the politics of affect at work here. So she's basically saying you'll be missing out.
I want to ask these people, when you say reclaiming constitution, there are, in my view, there are many unwanted things in the constitution. So are you also trying to reclaim that? So if in the directive principles of the state policy, it is mentioned that a state will make law against dietary freedom and ban beef. So when you claim constitution, are you also saying that you are going to reclaim that? Probably not. So what you mean is that when you say that it is reclaiming constitution, probably you mean the good things of the constitution, you know. And constitution as a document, we know, I mean, it is a document of power at one level. So that is first point. The second point is, I'm not saying that they didn't want to, I mean, of course, when it comes to the question of equality, dignity, you know, respect in terms of constitutional rights, you know, definitely they were making that claim. What I'm saying that they were also probably in the process radicalizing the whole idea of the constitution itself, rather than saying that, oh, we simply want to adhere to something which already exists, you know. They were also radicalizing in the sense that, look, or at one level, even mocking that, look, you say that there is freedom, you say that there is equality, but it is not there, you know. So it is, so rather than saying that it is simply an affirmation of constitution, or it has nothing to do with constitution, what I'm saying is that it is simultaneously an affirmation of constitution and at the same time asking, or it is displaying something that exceeds the constitution, you know, and which is not to make an anti-constitutional statement, by the way, because the values and the idea of the constitution, I think we have discussed it before, and there is no point in repeating it. So not simply the ideas, but as the Home Minister said that, you know, everybody responsible for the right, what he considered right would be punished. This statement itself is a nice one, but if you turn the very meaning of the culprit upside down, you know, and then say that, well, of course, you know, we'll punish all those responsible. So this is making a mockery of that idea. So that idea is, in some ways, it is in the constitution, you know, that, or it is at least constitutional values, you know. But what these protesters were doing is that affirming and at the same time radicalizing or renewing it in a manner that did not had that had not taken place, at least in intimate past, as opposed to distant past.
I think now we'll move on to the last question. That is from Hadia.
Thanks for the opportunity. Dear Professor, I have a straight question to you. This question is with respect to the participation of Muslim women in the movement. The question is, did Muslim women outnumbered Muslim men in asserting their identity as a Muslim as well as Indian citizen? Hello?
And you think this is a question?
Yeah. Was there a difference in response how Muslim men reacted to this CAA movement and how women reacted strongly to the movement.
Now you have changed the question, but your first question, this is a statistical question, which I think neither you have access to reply, nor do I have. So, yeah, that is my...
My another connected thought is that did women feel the immediacy of threat more strongly than Muslim men? Because compared to Muslim men, Muslim women came out in protesting, and they were more vocal on ground and on virtual platforms when compared to Muslim men.
Yeah, I mean, this is again not a question, because if you listen to the talk carefully, I'm not saying this talk is not about I've done an empirical study, you know, although when the event happened, as a citizen, I was there. So if you expect me to answer this kind of empirical question, which I have not done, then this is not a question in the first place. This question would be relevant to someone who has done an empirical work, you know, spoken to both women participants and men participants, evaluated their response. Only that person would be in a position to answer.
Okay, Professor Irfan, I think we have already crossed 2 hours and 30 minutes. However, I would like to take the last opportunity to ask a question. When you're talking about Shaheen Bagh, you are using Shaheen Bagh as a synonym for the whole anti-CAA movement itself, I think, because the other connected events like the protest at Jamia, the protest happening somewhere else, the images, the rhetoric and the discourse from other protest sites are being incorporated, and Shaheen Bagh acts as a synonym. So when Shaheen Bagh acts as a synonym, in the previous talk, Professor Tanveer Fazal was making this distinction of a chaotic protest and a disciplined protest. So Shaheen Bagh was always a disciplined kind of protest, but there were always events of chaotic protest. To move a little further, I would ask, when you are trying to talk about Shadab as a emergent, a courageous figure, what do you think of Shah Rukh? Shah Rukh, who fired back at the rioters or at the people who are coming to attack the Muslim community. So between Shadab and Shah Rukh, I think there is a difference from chaotic to the disciplined. How would you like to respond to this?
So what exactly is the question? I mean, about Shah Rukh, I will have to see. When I mentioned about Shadab, I did some research about it. I have not done, although I do remember that act. I think it was in East Delhi. But since I have not done the comparison, I cannot say this. Now, what was your first point about? Yeah, of course. Yeah, so if you see, like right in the beginning, I said, and let me take this opportunity to clarify it. So this is a sort of Wittgensteinian method. When I say that, you know, I take Shaheen Bagh as a metaphor of the whole anti-CAA movement, okay? So metaphor is like you use it as a ladder to get somewhere, you know? Now, of course, unless probably you have, you know, thousands of researchers, but this is a general thing. Nobody can study the whole movement, right? So of course, there were things happening in Bangalore, there were things happening in Calicut, there were things in Bhopal, in Patna, and so on and so forth, right? So that was the methodological choice that I made, But by the same token, anybody who studies, for example, Calicut Protestant or Bangalore, that will be also limited by its very nature, unless you do some kind of a statistical or quantitative thing, which American behavioralism does, and I have no respect or enthusiasm for that kind of analysis. So yes, there is a methodological choice which any talk or any research would do, with the difference that the site would be different.
Okay.
Just a second. Now, having said that, what I wanted to say is that what I aim to do in this talk is not that I want to pronounce some judgments, but it was more in terms of offering some reflections and of course, much more grounded empirical work on Shaheen Bagh is needed. And if what I have said has any meaning, one has to also see how things work differently in different sites, and the usual sociological question that, was it different in a rich neighborhood as compared to a poor neighborhood, whatever, all these kind of usual sociological question. So I think definitely more work is needed on different aspect of the Shaheen Bagh as a movement. My effort here was to shed some light, which I hope would be useful at least to some people, if not all.
Thank you very much, Professor Irfan. You have spent more than 2.5 hours with us, and the whole presentation, everything was so well structured and too interesting. Definitely people will have more questions and they will certainly get back to you. And of course, it might be because time is being running. As you can see, the number of participants is also coming down. Without taking any further time from myself, I will call Irfan, the president of Fraternity movement at University of Hyderabad, Irfan Ali Kesi, for giving the vote of thanks.
Hi, Professor Irfan Ahmad. Assalamu alaikum. It has been an invaluable opportunity to listen to you and your time. It has been like almost 3 hours right now. So that much amount of time we have spent with you, and thank you very much for that time, and also the kind of insights you have provided towards looking into Shaheen Bagh as an event from the socio-political perspective. Personally, it was a very new idea for me and many of the participants, and I thank you from the side of Fraternity Movement, University of Hyderabad, and from all of the participants here. And I also thank Professor Khaja Ziauddin, who came as a participant here, who was also one of our speakers in INKAAR, and everybody who attended the webinar and also raised questions and queries. Yeah, thank you for your time and your insights. We'll have this as a YouTube video after
a few edits as requested. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It was lovely having this discussion and interacting with diverse set of people. So let's hope once the COVID situation is gone, probably we'll have a chance to interact face to face. And thank you, Irfan, and to Fraternity Movement for this invitation, to Tahir for chairing, and to Farah for introducing. Thank you.